Welcome back. This is Steam Shadow, and I am here to finally go into how Germany could have won World War I. If you have not already, please watch Part 1 to understand the backstory behind World War I. Otherwise, enjoy. Now, before I get started, I just want to make it clear that these are just theories based on research. I could be wrong, it's simply speculative. Also, some of you might have noticed I have emphasized a German victory versus a victory of the Central Powers. Let me quickly explain why. Germany carried the bulk of the war effort for the Central Powers. While Germany was arguably the most powerful industrial nation in Europe, her allies were severely lagging. Germany held her own in the war for 4 years. They maintained a stalemate on the Western Front while overall making significant gains in the East. However, her allies were overall on the defensive. Throughout much of the war, the Allies made slow but steady ground against the Austrians and Ottomans. The only reason they did not collapse was because of German troops and commandos. Granted, I'm oversimplifying this, but I could do an entire episode on this topic. Basically, I'm just trying to say that victory relied mostly on Germany's actions. Even a victory on an Austrian or Ottoman front wouldn't have won the Central Powers the war. The best shot for victory was if Germany could knock out the Allies on the western and eastern fronts. From there, they could have moved troops to other Allied fronts, had the war even lasted that long. However, I'm getting ahead of myself. Without any further delays, let's talk about how Germany could have won World War I. Based on my research, there were 2 major opportunities Germany could have theoretically won the war. The first was at the very opening of the war in 1914. Germany's plan of attack was the Schlieffen Plan. This plan called for a rapid advance through neutral Belgium and into northern France. The German armies would then swing around the west of Paris, encircling the French forces. The goal was to knock France out of the war quickly and then attack Russia. This would prevent them from having to fight a war on 2 fronts. The plan would only work with quick movement, however. Unfortunately, things went wrong from the start. The Belgians put up a stiff resistance, delaying the Germans. In addition, the Russians mobilized troops in only 10 days instead of the 6 weeks as expected. With the delays caused by the Belgians, the British Expeditionary Force, the BEF, was able to land in France, thus causing further delays to Germany. However, even with this, it might have still been possible for the Schlieffen Plan to have succeeded, had they stuck to it. Many of the German generals did not understand the essence of the Schlieffen Plan and fragmented it. Let me describe 2 major instances. Originally, the plan called for a right wing of German forces. These forces would have swung along the coast and to the west of Paris. However, this key piece to the puzzle was stripped of its units at the request of German generals and were repositioned to help deal with the heavy resistance. Had the right wing been left intact, there would have been no Battle of the Marne, since the Germans and Allies wouldn't have become blocked at the Marne River. Secondly, in the quest for battlefield glory, several German generals jumped the gun. As the Germans were marching through Belgium and northern France, the French were invading southern Germany, specifically the Alsace and Lorraine territory lost by France during the Franco-Prussian War of 1871. The German plan was to let them march deep into the area and then cut them off, essentially trapping them inside Germany where they would be annihilated. Unfortunately, this did not happen. The German generals, again seeking battlefield glory, attacked too soon. Instead of encircling the French, they simply pushed them out of Germany. These troops would later fight at the Battle of the Marne. Lastly, key German troops were pulled from the Western Front by worried generals to attack the invading Russians. Whether or not these troops were needed may never be known, but it depleted essential troops from the Schlieffen Plan during its most critical stage. I could go on about more aspects of the Schlieffen Plan, but these are some of the major factors that ultimately led to its downfall. Had the right wing been left intact, had the French army been massacred instead of pushed back, and had the critical troops not been redeployed, the Schlieffen Plan might very well have worked. The Battle of the Mons would probably never have happened, and if it did, the outcome might have been very different. The Germans would have outflanked the French forces guarding Paris, annihilating them. They would have marched into Paris. With their armies decimated and retreating, France would probably have surrendered. After that, the Germans could have turned their full attention on the Russians, most certainly destroying them. However, I could be wrong. Is it possible, even with the fall of Paris and the destruction of the French army, that France could somehow stay in the fight, most likely at the urging of Great Britain? Maybe. It is unlikely, but if France did not completely and utterly collapse, maybe there still would have been a Western Front. The front would have been shifted at least 100 miles to the west, though, plus the Germans would have conquered much of the northern coast of France, maybe as far west as Dieppe. Either way, the tide of the war would have been significantly shifted in Germany's favor. That is one possibility. The other best time Germany could have won the war was in 1917. Just hear me out. In March of 1917, the first stage of the Russian Revolution occurred, called the February Revolution. I know it makes no sense, but I don't want to have to explain it. Long story short, the Tsar abdicated and a provisional government was instituted in its place. In your timeline, the provisional government continued the war much to the resentment of the Russian people. In November, another revolution happened, the October Revolution, in which the Bolsheviks seized power. In March of 1918, the Soviets signed a peace treaty with Germany. With this, the Germans were able to redistribute troops to the Western Front for their infamous Spring Offensive later that month, which ultimately failed. This is where the speculation kicks in. What if after the February Revolution, the provisional government had made peace with the Central Powers? For the sake of this scenario, it is unimportant as to the exact stipulations of the Russian surrender, although we could presume it would be similar to the one as the Soviets. If we use the similar time frame as in your timeline, the Russians would have made peace by about July of 1917. Germany would then be able to move its troops to the Western Front for what I will call the Summer Offensive. However, you might be wondering, if the Spring Offensive failed in 1918, what would make the Summer Offensive succeed? Well, there are two reasons. First off, it happened an entire year earlier. One reason the Spring Offensive failed was because the Germans, despite having a numerical superiority for the first time since 1914, were just too tired and exhausted from 4 years' worth of fighting to push as hard as they needed to. The offensive eventually fizzled out. In the new timeline, the Germans would still be tired, but not as tired as they would be in another year. More importantly, the ultimate reason the Spring Offensive failed was because of the Americans. The only reason the Germans were forced from the offensive to the defensive was because of fresh American troops. Granted, even in the new timeline, America would still be at war with Germany at this point. The Zimmerman telegram, one of the leading factors that caused America to declare war on Germany, was sent by Germany in January of 1917, before the Russian Revolution. Thus, assuming the following events happened the same, America would still be at war with Germany by April. However, it would be still another year before they made any significant impact. Thus, in our hypothetical summer offensive, we have less tired troops and no Americans to stop them. However, what exactly was the Spring Offensive, and what would our Summer Offensive look like? Well, in your timeline, the Spring Offensive was designed to attack the Allied lines near Saint-Quentin in northern France and push towards the sea. This would thus trap a large force of British and French troops in northern France, where they would be annihilated. For the sake of our scenario, let's say the Summer Offensive aimed to do the same thing. Unlike the Spring Offensive, however, the Summer Offensive succeeds. The Allied forces are trapped in northern France and are destroyed, costing hundreds of thousands of casualties, if not millions. With the German numerical superiority and the loss of entire Allied armies, the Germans would fight their way successively towards Paris and eventually conquer the city. Soon, France and Great Britain, with their war effort collapsing, sue for peace, and Germany has won World War I, and all the troops get to go home for Christmas. 3 years late. However, how likely would this be? In all honesty, I feel it is pretty high. It is doubtful that the French in Great Britain would have been able to maintain the war effort with so much loss of life. In addition, for much of the war, the French and British were hanging by their fingertips. With such a devastating blow, I would think they would finally fall off, either from military collapse or morale collapse on the home front. It is also unlikely that they could have held on for another year until the Americans came to their rescue. Is it possible they could have lasted that long? Maybe. Is it probable? Not really. Granted, I'm not saying it would have necessarily happened like this had the Russians surrendered in 1917. This is just one possible scenario. All I am trying to say is that when war broke out in 1914, Germany was not doomed to lose. Okay then. Well, I was planning on ending this episode here. Then I thought, what would a German victory look like? Well, if you want to know my thoughts on the issue, join me in part 3.